What's up, Fox here, and today we are talking about the GTX 1660 Super in 2023. The GTX 1660 Super was released in October of 2019, so almost 4 years at this point, boasting a base clock of 1530 MHz, a boost clock of 1785 MHz, a memory clock of 1750 MHz, 6 GB of GDDR6 memory, has a TDP of 125 watts, uses a 1 8-pin connector, 1 DVI, 1 HDMI, and 1 DisplayPort for outputs, and features up to DirectX 12. Now, what's very interesting is in the Steam hardware survey, the GTX 1650 is the most popular graphics card right now. But you don't see that kind of popularity with the GTX 1660, 1660 Ti, or 1660 Super, simply because they were higher priced at a time when people were kind of waiting for graphics cards. The 20 series was already out. So when looking for a decent budget GPU, the 1650 was what people went for, because the 1660 Super didn't have as many features as the 2060 did, and had no ray tracing support whatsoever. But that said, not everybody needs ray tracing when it comes to gaming, and the 1660 Super has gone down in price on used markets. You can usually get them for around $100. So let's hop into the benchmarks and I'll discuss the value proposition afterwards. Starting off with Starfield, the low settings at 1080p with the 50% render scale, since low settings automatically takes down the render scale. We saw an average frame rate of 73, a 1% low of 1, and a 0.1% low of 1. Now I have a Ryzen 9 5900X, which means that it should be more than capable of handling a 1660 Super, but my guess is that Starfield is so CPU intensive that there did end up being some micro stutter here and there because we were playing at such a low resolution. And because CPU is hogged up by Starfield, which is evident because when we switched Starfield from the 50% res scale to low full 1080p, we saw an average frame rate of 47, a 1% low of 26, and a 0.1% low of 25. So much better 1% and 0.1% lows, as well as a decently consistent frame rate. Now I will say I did not walk through New Atlantis on this playthrough, and I have a feeling that that would absolutely destroy frame rates on this card because it destroys frame rates on any card. So I'm just going to leave the broad statement of this game is playable, but you're going to have varying frame rates on whatever planet you're on and whatever you're doing in the activities. Up next, Lies of P at the ultra settings at 1080p. We saw an average frame rate of 95, a 1% low of 49, and a 0.1% low of 8. So there were moments of stutter here and there, but they weren't nearly as bad as Starfield was. And the overall frame rate absolutely floored me, considering we were playing this game at ultra settings on a card that isn't really meant for ultra settings in 2023. Now I will say the one limiting factor of the 1660 Super is going to be the VRAM. I think that 6 GB is not enough, and will start to hinder you at some point in the future. And up next is Counter-Strike 2 with the low settings at 1080p. Now there is no MSI Afterburner for Counter-Strike 2, so I used the Windows game bar average frame rate, and we saw an average frame rate of 280 FPS. There were certain parts of the map where you will go down to 200. There are other parts of the map where you will go up to 350, and this is just playing on Dust 2, not even accounting for the other maps. And as always, there's a disclaimer for Counter-Strike 2. This game will only run as fast as your CPU lets it, so it depends more on your CPU than GPU at this point. And if you're pairing the 1660 Super with something more sensible like an older i7, you may see worse frame rates. Up next is Cyberpunk 2077. At the low settings at 1080p, we saw an average frame rate of 94, a 1% low of 36, and a 0.1% low of 3. This is another result that absolutely floored me. You could crank the settings up to medium, probably not high, and still get 60 FPS out of this game, which I was super impressed by. Which means that Phantom Liberty will run well on this GPU as well. I have yet to buy it. I want to see it because of Idris Elba, but I haven't played through the main story of Cyberpunk 2077 at first. But nonetheless, you're going to have no issues playing this game on a 1660 Super. Up next is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. We are just a day shy of the Modern Warfare 3 beta at the time of this recording, so I apologize for that. Future recordings will have the beta. But it ran with the balance settings at 1080p. We saw an average frame rate of 95, a 1% low of 73, and a 0.1% low of 51. So another fantastic showing from the 1660 Super. In a competitive game like this, the higher the frame rate, the better, and we weren't running at the lowest possible settings. We were running at medium, essentially. Following that is Diablo 4 at the ultra settings at 1080p. We saw an average frame rate of 104, a 1% low of 76, and a 0.1% low of 44. Once again, I was surprised by this result. I did not expect even a top-down game like Diablo 4 to run at such a high frame rate at the ultra settings, but nonetheless, we saw a very respectable 100 FPS. And last, and the newest game on the list, is Assassin's Creed Mirage. It had us set to the medium settings. I turned off adaptive resolution and we went to full 1080p with an average frame rate of 64, a 1% low of 31, and a 0.1% low of 5. Assassin's Creed Mirage ran very well as well. So in 2023, the 1660 Super is still a very strong card. The 6GB of VRAM is going to be a limitation, but with that said, it's so much better than a 1066 gig used to be, or a 1063 gig used to be. So it's really not a bad proposition. It's going to be both better and worse than the GTX 1070 depending on how you look at it, but it's still not pulling punches in a lot of these modern games. We're seeing consistently above 60 FPS at 1080p, and in some of these games you can run it at a higher resolution if you wanted to, or run it at a higher frame rate if you wanted to. My goal in all these videos is always 60 FPS. But as you can tell, we deviated from that quite a lot in a lot of these games. So this thing, honestly, I was super surprised when I got it, because I tested the GTX 1650, and the 1650 is essentially a GTX 1060. It's not that much better. But this just completely floored me. I didn't realize how close to a 1070 it would be. And you're getting newer architecture, which means it'll be updated for longer. So you're getting no DLSS on this card, which is going to suck in the future. When games take a little bit more performance to achieve, you're going to start seeing the need for DLSS, but then again, there is FSR for public use. So on to the value proposition of the GTX 1660 Super, and this is where it struggled a few years ago, but I think is getting better. It retails for as low as $100. The GTX 1066 gig retails for about $80, so for $20 more, you are getting more performance out of it. And then if you go up an increment, the RTX 2060 is still about anywhere between $30 and $50 more. So I think that the used market has created a little bit of a wedge for the 1660 Super, in which you're not getting the mediocre sort of bare minimum requirements of the GTX 1060 that was $100 a few years ago, but you're not getting the modern features of the RTX 2060 and the performance of the 2060, but you're also saving 30 to 50 bucks. I think for around $100, it's not a bad option. Of course, there are other options from AMD as well. I'd say if you're looking at a card like this, it's definitely a card to consider. I don't think it'll disappoint if your target is 60 FPS at 1080p. Prices will vary, and you might get a better deal here and there. Just compare graphics cards. Compare the RX 580. Look at the RX 5000 series from AMD and see what those are going for. It all depends on the price in your area, but I think I could give the GTX 1660 Super a strong recommendation. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, like, subscribe, do as you usually do, and as always, buy yourself something nice. Post Editing Fox here. Just want to let you know I have an eBay account. The account name is PCNerd02, PCNERD02, where you can buy graphics cards that I've tested. I also have a Discord in the description down below, as well as a Patreon. Thank you so much.